Room 4C of the Finnick Interstellar Academy smelled like chalk analog and nervous sweat, and Nyla had been staring at the same seat for 11 minutes before the door finally slid open. She had expected many things from the transfer student. The Academy's administrative notice had been maddeningly brief. 1. Student, species, human, origin, soul. 3. Classification pending review. Nyla's own species, the Vathyrai, had catalogued exactly 40 confirmed sapient species across the settled arm of the galaxy, and every one of them arrived with a threat classification stamped somewhere on their file. Humans, notoriously, did not have one yet. 3 years since first contact, and the Compact's Xenobiology division still hadn't decided what shelf to put them on. What she had not expected was a boy. He looked entirely, disappointingly ordinary. Medium height, dark hair kept short, wearing the same plain gray academy uniform as everyone else, the fabric a size too loose like it had been issued without measuring him first. He walked to the one empty desk, beside her, because of course it was beside her. The universe had a sense of humor, and sat down without a word, without so much as a glance at the 40-some sets of alien eyes fixed on him. He smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It wasn't even, Nyla would later insist to her clutched siblings, a particularly warm smile. It was small, closed-mouthed, almost apologetic, the kind of smile a person gave when they knew they were being stared at and had simply decided not to make it anyone's problem. He caught her looking, and the smile widened by perhaps 2 degrees, and he gave her a short nod, the universal gesture the translator implants had all been calibrated to recognize as hello. "Elias," he said, quietly, holding out a hand in that odd human custom nobody had properly explained to her yet. She didn't take it. She was too busy noticing, with the particular horrified fascination of a prey species built by 4 billion years of careful evolutionary caution, that his heart rate, visible on her wrist-mounted biomonitor, a standard Academy safety accessory for exactly this kind of situation, was sitting at a slow, unbothered 58 beats per minute. Nobody's resting heart rate was 58 beats per minute while surrounded by 40 strangers from a dozen different star systems, half of whom had teeth. It took Nyla 3 days to work up the courage to ask Professor Kelt about it privately, after class, in the careful, roundabout way her culture considered polite. "The new student," she said. "Is he unwell?" Kelt, an old Threll instructor with 4 working eyes and considerably more patience than most, set down his data slate. "Unwell how?" "His biometrics. I've been monitoring them since he arrived, because," she hesitated, embarrassed, "because it seemed prudent. His heart rate doesn't elevate. Not during the threat simulation drills. Not during Corvain's territorial display in combat theory. Not even when Re-Thick 9 charged the practice ring at full aggression setting and everyone else in the room had a stress spike registered on the building's own sensors. And this concerns you. Professor, on my homeworld, an organism that doesn't register threat has usually stopped registering anything. It's the biological signature of apex predation. Something at the very top of a food chain, secure enough that nothing left alive poses it real risk." Kelt was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet Nyla had learned over 2 years in his classroom, that meant he was deciding how much truth a student could handle before dinner. "Have you looked up Sol 3's ecological classification?" he asked finally. She had not. That evening, curled in her nest pod with her data slate glowing blue in the dark, she did. Sol 3, Earth Provisional Deathworld Classification, Tier 3, Severe. Notable environmental hazards, extreme gravitational variance by elevation. Near total microbial saturation with pathogen diversity exceeding compact median by a factor of 11. Apex megafauna, with documented predation on the dominant sapient species persisting into the technological era. Weather systems classified as extinction capable, occurring on a documented annual cycle. She read for 2 hours. She did not sleep well. She found out the rest of it by accident, the way most true things got found out, not in a classroom, but in the quiet after one. The Academy ran a mandatory wilderness survival exercise every cycle, a supervised half-day drop into the tame, heavily monitored forest preserve outside the campus dome, meant to teach basic off-world field skills to a generation of students who mostly grew up in climate-controlled habitats. It was, by design, almost entirely without risk. The preserve's largest resident predator was a Grelic pack hunter roughly the size of a large dog, tranquilizer collared and tracked at all times. The collar failed on the third hour. Nyla heard the alarm chime on her wrist before she heard the growling, and by the time the sound reached her, low, rolling, unmistakably close, half her classmates had already scattered in a dozen directions. Exactly the wrong response. Exactly what the safety briefing had told them not to do. She froze instead, every ancestral instinct in her body screaming at her to become very small and very still. And it was in that frozen half-second that she saw Elias move. He didn't run. He stepped, once, deliberately, putting his own smaller frame between her and the tree where the growling was coming from. And his posture changed in a way she had no reference for, shoulders dropping, weight settling low and even across both feet, hands loose and ready at his sides. The soft, apologetic smile was gone. What replaced it was something so quiet and so total that Nyla, whose species had spent 4 billion years learning to recognize exactly this kind of stillness in exactly this kind of creature, understood in her bones before her translator implant had finished parsing the syllables of what he said next. "Stay behind me," Elias said, in a voice that hadn't changed volume at all, and somehow carried anyway. "It's all right. I've got this." The Grelic broke from the tree a heartbeat later, already committed to its charge, and Elias didn't run from it either. He watched it come with an expression of calm, focused attention that Nyla would spend years afterward trying to describe to people who hadn't seen it and simply couldn't. Not fear, not excitement, but the particular, ancient patience of something that had simply been waiting, its whole quiet life, for a threat to finally show up worth paying attention to. The Academy's emergency response drones reached the clearing 4 seconds later and found the Grelic unconscious, re-tranquilized, and Elias kneeling beside it checking its pulse with the same gentle, methodical care he'd shown holding open doors all week, murmuring something soft and apologetic to an animal that had just tried to kill him, like the whole encounter had been an honest misunderstanding between neighbors. "You could have been hurt," Nyla told him afterward, once her hands had stopped shaking enough to hold a cup of the lukewarm nutrient tea the infirmary handed out to everyone as a matter of course. Elias considered this with the particular seriousness he gave most questions, like he was turning it over to check all its sides. "Maybe," he admitted. "Probably not, though." It was scared and confused, not really hunting. Mostly it just needed someone to not run. "How do you know that?" He shrugged, the small apologetic smile creeping back. The one she now understood wasn't apologetic at all. It was simply the resting expression of something that had made its peace, a long time ago, with a universe that kept trying to eat it. Grew up around things a lot bigger and a lot less friendly than a Grelic. You learn to read a charge pretty quick, where I'm from. Whether it wants to hurt you or whether it just wants you to leave. Your world sounds terrifying. It is, Elias agreed, entirely without complaint, like he was confirming the weather. It's also home. You get used to it. Mostly you just learn to smile at things, stay calm, and not be the thing running. Nyla looked at him for a long moment. At the plain gray uniform, the ordinary haircut, the small closed-mouth smile that 40 separate species across the compact would eventually, slowly, come to recognize as one of the more quietly unsettling things in the known galaxy, and found, to her own considerable surprise, that the fear she'd been carrying around him for 3 days had transformed into something else entirely. It took her a while to name it. When she finally did, sitting alone in her nest pod that night with the memory of his stillness in the clearing replaying behind her eyes, the word that came to her wasn't fear at all. It was relief, the specific, bone-deep relief of a small prey creature who had just realized, for the first time in her whole cautious life, that something dangerous had decided, quietly, and without being asked, to stand between her and the dark.